Okay, thank you. And now we are going to move to our second presentation. Our presenters are coming from the Publication Office of the European Union. Maria Kardami is a digital preservation archivist at the office, and she is responsible for policies, standards, metadata, and other aspects of the digital preservation. Before she joined the Publication Office, she worked for the National Archives of Greece. And the second presenter is Kardami Frappart. She is a digital preservation archivist in the Publication Office, and she is responsible for management, the collections to preserve, the preservation policies, and the coordination of various projects. And her background is also in the private sector. They're going to talk about their experience with the change of the data management service from keeping data in a repository into the long-term preservation. So, please.
Okay, so first of all, thank you. So I'm very pleased to present our Publications Office e-archiving journey. In fact, when Fulgencio and his colleagues asked us to present the Publications Office as a success story, we were a bit surprised. I have to confess it, because we were not aware that we were using the building blocks. So we went into it, and we realized that, yes, in fact, we are doing it. So, okay, so this presentation will explain what we do, and what we do well, obviously. So the outline. So first of all, I will present you the Publications Office to give you the framework, the context in which we work. As a second point, I will explain you how we organize the long-term preservation service at the Publications Office. And then Maria will take over with some more details about our policies, the tools we use, and so how we concretely put all that into place. So first of all, the presentation of the Publications Office. Who are we? We are part of the Commission, but we are in fact an interinstitutional service provider for all the EU institutions. We publish the EU law and also all the other information from the EU institutions. Publications Office has been established in '69. So previously we published already things since '52, in fact, but we were only a service and not an institution on its own. So the legal basis stems from 2009. It's a recast of a previous one from '69, because we evolved. The first mandate we had was to publish the publications of the institutions, but we progressively shifted our mandate, and we became an information, a provider of information management services. So who do we work for? We have what we call author services, and they are in fact all the EU institutions. So I've put the logos of the main ones, so the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, the Court of Justice, and so on. We work also for all the EU bodies, like the European Investment Bank, the etc., and all the EU agencies, which are a lot. But we work for the Commission, for example, also for specific DGs. So we have a lot of stakeholders. Our mission relies on 4 pillars. So first of all, the production of publications, of course. But we provide also access to those publications, with a special concern on the reuse, since the reuse directive. And of course, this has to be backed up by long-term preservation, because we cannot give access on the long term if we don't have long-term preservation behind. no, it's this one. So what do we publish? So this slide shows the two different kinds of publications that we deal with. On the left side, you see an example of the official journal, which is published every day and which contains all the EU law. But we have also a lot of other legislative documents that we publish, all the preparatory documents like the COM documents, but also the case law and the treaties and so on. And on the right side, this is a set of examples of what we call the general publications. Those are books, newsletters, all kinds of information on very various careers or types of publications, because there are apps, there are e-books, leaflets, posters. So we have a very large palette of different publications. Concerning the access and the reuse, all the publications that we produce are available on various websites. So here is a set of examples of the websites that we manage. There is the main one is eArchiving, so the one that gives access to the European Union law. The other big one is the what we call the OP portal, Publications Office of the European Union, which gives access to the same thing as what you find in eArchiving, but also to all the general publications. A third one is about the public procurement, so TED, Tenders Electronic Daily, where we publish all the public procurement of all the EU institutions, but also all the administrations of the member states. We publish also the web archive, so all the sites of the EU institutions that we crawl regularly are published on this website. And we publish also other things that it's kind of reuse, because in order to index all the OJ, the Official Journal Acts, we use a thesaurus, which is published under the EU vocabularies, so it's Eurovoc. We have also the EU data portal, which publishes data sets produced by all the EU institutions. The EU Who's Who is the organization chart of the human resources of all the EU institutions, and Cordis, which presents the results of research funded by European Union money. Let's go now to the second part of this presentation. So how are we organized concerning the OP long-term digital preservation service? Our mandate is written in the legal basis, and we should preserve all EU law and EU publications that is identified by the Publications Office. So we publish, but we give also identifiers, which are international ones like ISBN, ISSN, the DOI, and we have also our internal identifier, which is called the catalog number. And we preserve the things that are published in whatever form or career. As interinstitutional body, we centralize all the publications and the preservation of all the publications. So it means that we make economies of scales, because we do this service for all the other institutions. Our vision about that is that we preserve, of course, but we preserve in such a manner that the data remain accessible and authentic over time. And if new content type emerge, like, for example, web and so on, that are not in the legal basis, we get mandate from the EU institutions to add it to our the tasks that we have to perform. Concerning our resources, for the staff, we are now a dedicated unit since April of last year, because previously the long-term digital archive was part of the IT department. So since last year, we are a separate unit with two sections. The first one is about the long-term preservation with 12 staff members. And we have all the activities regarding archive. We deal with the electronic archive, but also with the physical one, and also with the digitization and web archiving. The second section is dealing with the cataloging of the publication. So they give the identifiers and they create the notices of the publications. Always concerning our resources, the long-term digital archive is an externalized service. So we are not enough to deal with all what we have to do. So we have a contract in 2 lots to help us to perform our missions. Those 2 lots are based on ISO, but Maria will explain you that in detail afterwards. So there is 1 lot about the service in itself and another one for audit and consultancy. So the first lot, preservation, we have a contractor who deals with all the technical infrastructure. So he set up data centers, and he's responsible for the long-term preservation service. So he does the ingestions, the archival storage. He does also the preservation actions that we tell them to do. He provides also the access to the UDO team, because it's a system that is protected, so accessible only to the long-term preservation team. And on the other side, we, as a publications office, we retain ownership of the data, and we give the big business orientations, we give specifications if there are developments to do, and we, of course, monitor the administrative sides of the contract. The second lot is an interesting one because it provides us audit and consultancy. Especially at the beginning, the externalized service is quite new. It's since 2016 that we have it. So the auditors gave us a lot of help and of consultancy about how to do it. They gave us training. They helped us to write the long-term digital preservation plan. They help us for setting up policies, for setting up new procedures, and also for the migration of the data. Here is a slide about our workflow. So you see that above you have all our author services, so the EU institutions and bodies and the EU agencies, who provide us the things that are to be published. It can be manuscripts ready for publishing, or manuscripts that have to be fine-tuned before being published. But all those data come into our dispatch system, reception and dispatch system, which is called New Ceres. And this system, well, if needed, sends the manuscripts to the concerned units who prepare the PDF and the files that have to be ready for publication. And once the files are ready, they are sent to the dissemination repository. So we publish first, and we archive in a second step. So all the things that are in the dissemination repository are there, and this is the basic or the source from which the various websites take the information. So the latest version is always in this dissemination repository. And afterwards, we put a copy in the digital archive. Some figures now. So about our collections. We have about 1 million publications. So with publication, I mean a work, so a title in all its language versions, because we publish in, the official journal is published every day in 23 languages, sometimes 24. So we have only one notice that describes the publication. So we count per publication. So we have 1 million items, and we have an average of 10 million language versions, because, well, there are publications in 23 languages, others in less, of course. But the files, of course, are much more numerous, because we have about 75 million files of content files. I even don't count the metadata files. But if you look at the size, it depends on how we see the things. So if we look at the number of publications, you see that 10% of the publications are what we call general publications, whereas we have 90% of legislative publications. But in terabytes, it's not the same. The general publications are bigger with images and so on, so they are about 40%, whereas the legislative is 60% of the size of what we have. So the current coverage is, as I said, the legislative documents and the general publications, but we have some planning. The next collections to be ingested are the public procurements from the TED website, also the web archive. So we are crawling the sites, but they are currently on a hard disk. So we need to ingest them to preserve them correctly. So this is one of the next steps. But there are also the EU apps that are currently not preserved. And we would like also to crawl the EU official social media. So so this slide is about the real journey that we did until now. So if we look at the origin of our archives, it stems from 1987, and it was called ARCDON. So Archive pour disque optique numérique. So it was a French acronym, and it was in fact a file system with some COM documents and some legislative documents. At that time, almost everything was published on paper, so we had not so many digital objects. Then in 95, there was a big campaign where we digitized all the official journal. So we took the paper from the basement, and we digitized in all the languages. And then we said, okay, we have to put that somewhere. And that's why EUDOR version 1 has been set up. EUDOR for European Document Repository. But it was also a file system, just with very minimal metadata. So, well, we did bit preservation, so it was there. We knew where it was. It was structured, but there were no specific preservation actions done on it. Then the version 2 of EUDOR, from 2007 to 2016, there were two major events that happened. The first one is that we digitized all the general publications. It took us 2 years to digitize, I think, more than 1 million pages. And here also we enriched the collection with a lot of TIFFs and PDF files. And the second one, which is even more important, is that a regulation decided that the official journal on paper didn't have precedence anymore. So the PDF of the full OJ had legal value and had precedence on the paper. So this meant for us as archive that we had a bigger responsibility. It means that we had to ensure the fact that this OJ wouldn't be modified and that it was the real one published from the beginning on. So that's why we shifted to UDOR 3 in this time, not only just an electronic archive, but a real long-term repository with preservation actions, with trained staff, with all the things that go together with a real long-term preservation service. And also we took all the metadata, descriptive metadata that are published on the websites, we took them and we archived them also. Because previously we had only the files, mainly PDF and TIFF, but without metadata, or with very minimal ones. Only the name of the files was indicating the content. So now we had to take all the RDF metadata. So it was a big shift, a big difference. So here is how did we this transition from a simple electronic archive to the long-term digital repository. Our director at that time gave the impulse by saying, okay, let's go to get the ISO certification, so the ISO 16363. It's a big challenge because it's a lot of work. But we already did some of the actions that were planned. The first one was to write a digital preservation plan, which is a policy document describing what we do, how we do, why, and so on. And we were mainly 3-4 persons, yeah. One IT, one more knowing the collections, and one more archivist, and we wrote different parts and we tried to set up something. Then it was revised, and now it's in a state that is more readable. And but we still need to add and fine-tune the annexes with the real concrete actions about the policies. A second action was to migrate, but mainly to clean the collections we had in UDOR 2 and to put them in the new repository. Because, yes, before migrating them to a repository where we knew that we would migrate the things, we cleaned a bit collections that are not worth to be preserved, or formats that were not perfect. So we migrated them before ingesting them. So this is not finished, but almost. So this was also a big task. Then I spoke about it already. A new team has been created and a dedicated unit has been set up. And the contract with the externalized service was also concluded. Okay, so then I will give the floor to Maria, and she will explain you in detail now how we have implemented the long-term digital preservation service here.
Thank you, Corinne. Well, and I will ask a bit for your patience. I'm the last one to speak, but I can understand that you're a bit tired. But I will try to keep it short. And most of the things you have heard already during the day, standards and more implementation aspects. So I think it's also a bit of a wrap-up for the day. Sorry. Yep. Okay. So as my colleague Corinne has mentioned, the Publications Office vision is to preserve all EU publications and legislation, and especially since July 2013, the official journal, only the electronic version has legal value. This has brought some more responsibility to the archive. And our aim is to ensure that we preserve and ensure that the digital objects are accessible and authentic over time. In order to achieve this goal, we are relying substantially on international standards and specifications that are proposed by the digital preservation community. So the cornerstone of our digital preservation activities is the Open Archival Information System Standard, which defines the functional model and the information model that our long-term digital repository is based on. And this is the RODA system that you have seen before. OIS defines also the packages that you have seen today, the submission information package, the archival information package, and the dissemination information package. And for this, we are using the E-ARK specifications. Currently, we are using the specifications only for the archival information package, but in the future, we could move to use it also for the submission and the dissemination package. The submission package today already, let's say, is E-ARK enabled because it is using the METs. It will need just to be adapted in order to conform to the specifications. And another standard that we're using is the premise. This is being used by the RODA repository in order to document technical metadata, like the file size, the file format, the checksum of a file, also document structural metadata, but most importantly, the events, which are actions that an agent is performing on the objects. And there, we are documenting the major actions that are happening to the object during its life cycle. But just to let you know that we are recording so far preservation metadata from the point on ingest in the archive. We don't have currently the life cycle of the object before it arrives to the archive. This is something that we would like to improve in the future. Also, something we would like to work on is to improve and provide documentation for the context over the collection. As Fuljan mentioned in the morning, imagine in 10 years' time, there's no one of us. Corinne has a lot of knowledge of the collections and how they emerged, and we need this to document that. So there will be a lot of work on that, and there already RODA supports us in this by providing already the encoded archival description standard. And by using also the international standard for archival description, we aim to achieve this goal as well. Finally, in order to ensure, as I said, that our documents are authentic and provide the evidence that it is required to be a trustworthy digital repository, we are aiming to fulfill the criteria for getting the ISO certification 16363. As for the tools, I have mentioned that we are using the open source RODA digital preservation repository. You have seen it in more detail before. What I can add is that indeed it supports the standards that I mentioned before, and also it allows customization, for example, for the metadata and the user interface, so which metadata we are able to search for. This is something that we can customize. Of course, it's us, the Publications Office, that will give the specifications based on which metadata properties they need to reuse in order to display them in the interface. Also, for example, for the statistics, Indeed, they have some very nice statistics, but they are as good as the data we have in the repository. And for example, we have today 43 different formats, file formats, but this is not really, so in the statistics we can see 43, but this is not really the case because there are some problems with the files. And the tool that identifies, does the file type identification, has some warnings, which we will have to look into. So there is a lot of work that has to be done. I mean, the tools are there to support, but there is a lot of data curation and management that has to be done by the organization. So something that we already try to enforce from the producer side, because the Publications Office, as we mentioned, produces the final documents through the contracts that we have with our printers, called contractors. We enforce somehow the standards on which they have to use in order to produce those documents. So already today, we are producing in PDF-A. We have used the TIFF standard for digitized documents. We are actively also producing XML as a reuse format. And when we crawl the European Union websites, we are storing the result in the E-ARK standard. So we are using open, non-proprietary, and as much as sustainable formats possible. So if I move a bit more concretely in our digital preservation implementation, I have chosen here a few topics to explain to you how the Publications Office has gone about those. So concerning information security, for example, the access is restricted only to a handful of people who are responsible for the implementation of the service, and only the administrator has full rights to read, write, move, delete objects in the repository. All users are authenticated and all actions are logged. Concerning storage, we have 3 copies of our data. 2 copies in data centers, they are both in Luxembourg. But we have also 1 offline copy, which is in a different technology than the other ones. One action that RODA is performing also to ensure that the files have not been corrupted between the transfer from the producer and their arrival to the long-term archival repository. It's the assignment of a checksum to every file and a fixity check, a check towards the checksum that the producer has originally transmitted. The checksum is like a fingerprint for every document, and if these values do not match, this means that the document has been altered between the point A and point B in the transfer. So we ensure that the files are what they purport to be before ingestion into the archive. As I mentioned before, also RODA is performing the file format identification using the Siegfried tool. And there, as we said, we have some warnings and issues but the tool supports us in doing that. So that's the good thing, and we need to actively solve the issues. This comes also to data validation, and there the producer already enforces a lot of validation on, so the PDFs are checked with the CALA software to ensure conformance to the PDF-A standard. The XML is validated against the schema that has been used to generate it. So there is already a lot of validation checks from the producer, but also from the archive point of view, we enforce validations, for example, that that the submission package is complete, and for example, that there are no unexpected files in the package. Concerning metadata and documentation, there for metadata, every object that arrives to the repository is accompanied by rich descriptive metadata. And these metadata comply to a data model that the producer has defined. And also, every file, every digital object comes also with technical metadata. Again, file size, format, checksum. As I mentioned, yeah, the preservation metadata, they start being captured. We have some metadata that we could exploit, but we are not there yet. And all of these policies and activities, they are documented in the digital preservation plan that Corinne mentioned before, which is like one document which defines our vision, mission, and strategy, and our strategies in general for the preservation. And then this document is accompanied by several annexes which document in more details and more technical aspects of the implementation. One aspect that we run on a weekly basis is collaboration with the producer. So this is something also to have in mind, that we need to understand how the producer is actually modeling the data, the metadata. So there is a lot of work that is implied there, and also we have to agree about the transferring of the objects, how often, the frequency. So there are a lot of things to agree together with the producer of the data. Another task that we have is like the risk management and evaluation, and every 3 to 4 months the team, the digital preservation team of the publications office, will meet in order to identify new risks, but also the risks that we have already identified, to review their likelihood, impact, and define mitigation actions. And since October this year, we started also to evaluate a bit and see where we stand. And for this purpose, we have used the Digital Preservation Coalition Rapid Assessment Model. And actually, in half a day, we were able to very quickly visualize where we stand concerning our digital preservation activities, and see also where we should put more effort and our focus on in the future, in the coming months and years. And this is an activity that we are planning to do more or less on a yearly basis. Of course, the Publications Office is not alone in this journey, and as it has been mentioned also by Karin and other speakers today, we belong to the digital preservation community, and we wouldn't be able to achieve all this without the support of the standards and the technology watch report and all the information which is available online. So actually we are members of the Digital Preservation Coalition, and which is a non-profit company which offers trainings and webinars and technology watch reports, consultancy, and all sorts of support that you can imagine. We network and share knowledge with other organizations that implement digital preservation services, currently also in Luxembourg, with a Bibliothèque Nationale de Luxembourg, for example. We attend trainings, webinars, and conferences. We follow up a mailing list and Twitter hashtags in order to keep abreast of the evolutions in the domain. And also we maintain a technology watch log where we document all articles, books, blog posts that we find interesting and that helped us to form our policy. So we have a source list. So, of course, digital preservation is not a one-off activity, and we cannot. There are still many things that we need to work on, and we don't have a roadmap yet, but we would like to work in the coming years on the following topics. As I mentioned before, the official journal, which is signed, digitally signed, we need to ensure that also the digital signature is properly preserved. And there we need to evaluate how we will do that. Today, we don't have any control at the archive level for PDFA conformance. So this is something that we would like also to examine in the near future. Also, we don't perform a device check. it is a quite controlled environment, the production systems that we have, but it's something that we need to examine, at least to evaluate the risk. Also, as I mentioned, we will want to preserve archive file formats like the result of the web archiving, and also today the producer is submitting some digital objects in zip format. So again, there we need to define the policy. Do we unzip? Yes, no, how do we handle that? We need as well to add representation information. It was mentioned before, also in another presentation. And there, for example, we have XML files. For example, we need to preserve as well the XML schema and its documentation in order to make sure that the content is understandable in the future. We need to define some policies that we are missing, and also to improve documentation, because again, also it's not a one-off process that we have written it and it's there. We need to make it up to date. As I mentioned, provide context for the collections, so again, falling in the direction of documentation. And finally, prepare for the ISO 16363 certification. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions.
Thank you. Despite we are slightly behind the schedule, I think we can have a few questions, one or two. So if anyone would like to be first. Yeah, please.
There is a preservation service foreseen by the eIDAS regulation for electronic signature and seals, and there is a different kind of certification. Has this project taken into account the eIDAS regulation, or it's something that is seen as out of scope? Or because if the goal for eIDAS regulation is a preservation for long term of signature and seals, electronic signatures and electronic seals, to keep the legal validity of the signature over time, either forever. So I think that the two certifications should, the certification in case of eIDAS regulation and the possible certification in case of archiving should somehow be aligned, or some work is needed, in my opinion, to try to keep them aligned.
This is definitely something that we will have to evaluate when we will progress a bit with the implementation, because currently we have focused more on the verification of the signature before ingesting it into the archive and preserving this verification report together with the signature. But it's true, we need to go deeper and analyze further the issue together also with the regulation. Thank you.
Another question, maybe? Yes, please.
Thank you for the presentation. How easy or how difficult did you find it through the different, I would say, practical implementations to define the granularity of your submission packages? Or I don't know if you could give just a practical example of, for example, in the context of Eurolex or another project, how you define the scope of a package or a submission package?
So actually there, I would say we are touching a bit about the model that we are using for our data, and we are using the Ferber model, which is like the functional requirements for bibliographic records. And there we consider, for example, as Corinne mentioned, the official journal, it's a work. So an intellectual entity. And then the linguistic versions are called expressions as defined in this model. And then the different formats in which the same content is manifested, they are called the manifestations. So this, for example, for us, this is one submission package. But then, for example, for dissemination purposes, we have every act that is part of this official journal it's considered another work. And there, it has, again, the linguistic versions and the format, and this is a separate submission package. So there have been some decisions, specifically at the producer side, and also in collaboration with us, in order to agree, what is the granularity of the submission package. And this is a very good question, for example, for the web archives. It's something that we need to quite extensively discuss, because it's not super clear yet how we will go. Some people I've heard, for example, they have implemented that there is one submission package for one work file, not even, So there we will have to discuss on this and decide the granularity.
Okay, thank you. I will close now this session.